Taxi driver saves unconscious boy, got shocked when he saw his ID. The dashboard clock blinked 2:47 a.m. as James Carter's taxi glided through Manhattan's rain-slicked streets. The rhythmic swish of windshield wipers kept time with the jazz playing softly on his radio. Another graveyard shift in the city that never sleeps. At 52, James had spent more nights behind this wheel than he cared to count, each evening blending into the next like watercolors in the rain. But this night was different. He just didn't know it yet. The call had come in 10 minutes ago, a pickup at the Red Dragon, one of those underground clubs that catered to the city's insomniacs and lost souls. James had seen enough in his 20 years of driving to know that nothing good happened in places like that after 2 a.m. Still, a fare was a fare, and his daughter's college tuition wouldn't pay itself. As he turned onto Canal Street, something caught his eye, a flash of movement in his peripheral vision, there and gone like a ghost in the fog. James eased off the gas, squinting through the rain-streaked windshield. Years of navigating New York's nightlife had honed his instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming at him to stop. That's when he saw it, a crumpled form half hidden in the shadow of a dumpster, one arm stretched out onto the wet pavement like a broken marionette. "Jesus Christ," James muttered, pulling the taxi to the curb. He should call it in, let the cops handle it. That's what the taxi company's policy demanded. That's what common sense dictated. But 20 years ago, before the taxi license and the failed marriage and the countless nights ferrying strangers through darkness, James had been a combat medic. Some instincts never fade. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment, its familiar weight a comfort in his hand. The rain had picked up, drumming against his jacket as he approached the figure. Up close, he could see it was a boy, maybe 16 or 17, wearing an expensive-looking school blazer now soaked through with rain and something darker that made James's heart skip a beat. "Hey, kid!" He knelt beside the still form, checking for a pulse. It was there, strong but rapid. No obvious wounds, but a nasty bruise was forming on his temple. The boy's skin was cold to the touch, but he hadn't been out here long. His clothes were wet but not saturated through. James played the flashlight over the scene, years of medical training kicking in. No signs of a struggle, no blood trail. Either the kid had been dumped here, or he'd managed to drag himself into the alley before losing consciousness. Either way, he needed help. "Can you hear me?" James patted the boy's cheek gently, then more firmly when there was no response. Nothing. But the kid's breathing was steady, and his airway was clear. Small mercies. Protocol said to call 911 and wait. But something about the scene felt wrong. The expensive blazer, the fresh bruise, the way the boy had been positioned, almost hidden from street view. If someone had wanted this kid found, they'd have left him in plain sight. James reached for the boy's jacket pocket, hoping for ID. His fingers closed around a leather wallet, high-end like everything else the kid was wearing. The student ID inside made his blood run cold. Ethan Mitchell. Age 16. St. James Preparatory Academy. Mitchell. The name hit him like a physical blow, sending him staggering back on his heels. How many times had he traced those letters, writing and rewriting them in his mind? Sarah Mitchell. The woman he'd loved and lost, the one person who'd made him feel like more than just another cab driver cutting through the night. James's hands trembled as he studied the photo on the ID. The boy had Sarah's features, her high cheekbones, the slight curl at the corners of his mouth. But there was something else, something that made James's chest tight with recognition. The boy had his eyes. The same deep brown that stared back at him from every mirror, the same slight tilt at the corners. "No," he whispered, but the truth was already taking root in his mind, sprouting like weeds through concrete. The timing would be right. 16 years since he'd last seen Sarah, since his family had convinced him that a poor immigrant's daughter wasn't good enough for their son, since he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. A groan from the boy snapped James back to the present. Questions could wait. Right now, Ethan, his son, needed help. But the nearest hospital was Manhattan General, too public, too many questions. The kind of questions that might attract attention from whoever had left a 16-year-old boy unconscious in an alley. James made a decision. He knew a clinic in Queens, run by an old army buddy who didn't ask questions and didn't keep records. It would mean abandoning his shift, probably a write-up from dispatch, maybe even a suspension. But looking down at Ethan's face, at features that were somehow both familiar and strange, none of that seemed to matter. With gentle movements that belied his size, James lifted the boy. Ethan's head lolled against his shoulder, and for a moment, James was transported back to dusty streets in Baghdad, carrying another young man to safety. But this was different. This wasn't just another casualty of war or victim of city violence. This was possibly his son, a piece of his past risen up from the depths of memory like a shipwreck breaking the surface. As he laid Ethan across the taxi's back seat, James noticed something fall from the boy's blazer pocket. A small package, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with red wax. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. No markings, no address, nothing to indicate what it might contain. But something about it raised the hairs on the back of his neck. James slipped the package into his jacket pocket. Whatever it was, it could wait. Right now, he had more important things to worry about. Like what he was going to say if Ethan woke up. Like whether he had any right to speak the truth that was burning in his throat. The taxi's engine hummed to life, and James pulled away from the curb, leaving behind an empty alley and the last remnants of his ordinary life. As he navigated through the rain-soaked streets, his mind raced with questions. What had happened to Sarah? Why had she never told him about their son? And most importantly, what kind of trouble was Ethan in? The answers, he suspected, would change everything. But for now, all he could do was drive, following the faint pulse of hope that beat in time with his heart, leading him toward a future he'd never imagined possible. The fluorescent lights of Dr. Mike Chen's clinic cast harsh shadows across the waiting room's faded blue walls. James sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, turning the mysterious package over and over in his hands, his mind drowning in a flood of memories he'd spent 16 years trying to forget. Sarah Mitchell. Even thinking her name made his chest ache. They'd met at a small coffee shop in the Lower East Side, where she worked while pursuing her art degree. James had been fresh out of the army, still adjusting to civilian life, driving a taxi to make ends meet. He remembered that first morning with crystal clarity, the way she'd drawn a perfect rose in the foam of his latte, the sparkle in her eyes when he'd complimented her artistry. "It's nothing," she'd said, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "You should see my real paintings." And he had seen them, eventually. Huge canvases filled with swirling colors and hidden meanings, stacked in the tiny studio apartment she shared with 2 other aspiring artists. Sarah painted like she lived, boldly, passionately, unafraid of making mistakes. She taught James to see beauty in the chaos of city life, to find poetry in the mundane moments between shifts. "Mr. Carter?" Dr. Chen's voice jolted James back to the present. The doctor stood in the doorway, his face carefully neutral. "Can we talk?" James followed him into a small office cluttered with medical texts and faded diplomas. The package felt heavy in his pocket, a reminder of the night's strange turns. "The boy's going to be fine," Dr. Chen said, closing the door. "Mild concussion, some bruising, but nothing serious. He's sleeping now." He paused, studying James's face. "Want to tell me what's really going on? This isn't just another Good Samaritan case, is it?" James ran a hand over his face, feeling the stubble of his night shift. "Mike, you remember Sarah Mitchell?" Recognition flickered across the doctor's features. "The artist? The one your family..." He trailed off, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The boy? His ID says he's 16. The timing fits." James pulled out the student ID, placed it on the desk between them. "Look at his eyes, Mike. Look at his face." Dr. Chen examined the photo, then looked back at James. "Does he know? He's been unconscious since I found him. But that's not all." James placed the package next to the ID. "This fell out of his pocket. No markings, no address. Just this red wax seal. The doctor picked up the package, weighing it in his hand. Could be nothing. When has it ever been nothing? Unconscious kid, expensive clothes, mysterious package? Something's wrong here, Mike. And if he really is... James couldn't finish the sentence. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in. Doctor, the patient's awake. He's asking about his jacket. James and Dr. Chin exchanged glances. The package suddenly felt like a live grenade in the room. Go, Dr. Chin said, sliding the package into his desk drawer. Talk to him. I'll keep this safe until we figure out what's going on. The walk to the examination room felt like the longest of James's life. Each step brought him closer to a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Through the window, he could see Ethan sitting up on the examination table, looking younger and more vulnerable in a borrowed hospital gown. Before he could enter, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. James almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Hello? Do you have it? A man's voice, cold and precise. The package. James's blood ran cold. Who is this? Someone who knows what Sarah Mitchell was really involved in. Someone who knows why she really died. A pause. Check your email, Mr. Carter. You have 1 hour to deliver the package, or your newfound son will disappear just like his mother did. The line went dead. James's hands shook as he opened his email. There it was, a single message containing a video file. He pressed play, and his world tilted on its axis. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Sarah, older than he remembered but still beautiful, standing in what looked like an art gallery after hours. She was arguing with someone off camera, her face twisted with anger and fear. You can't keep using the gallery like this. Her voice crackled through the phone's speaker. I won't let you. The video cut off. James leaned against the wall, his mind racing. Sarah's death 3 years ago. He'd assumed it was the cancer Ethan had mentioned. But now, what had she gotten involved in? What was in that package? And most importantly, how could he protect the son he'd only just found? Through the examination room window, he could see Ethan checking his phone, his face growing increasingly anxious. The boy knew something was wrong. He was trying to hide it, but James recognized the look. It was the same expression he'd seen in his own eyes every morning after coming home from Iraq, the look of someone carrying a weight too heavy for their shoulders. Another memory surfaced, Sarah standing in the rain outside his parents' brownstone, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. Your family might think I'm not good enough for you, James, she'd said. But at least I'm not a coward. She'd been right. He'd been a coward then, choosing family obligation over love. But not anymore. Whatever Sarah had been involved in, whatever danger Ethan was in, James wouldn't run this time. He took a deep breath and opened the examination room door. Ethan looked up, brown eyes, his eyes, wary and questioning. How are you feeling? James asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Like I got hit by a truck. Ethan attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My jacket, there was something important. I know, James interrupted. And I know about your mother. The real story. Ethan's face went pale. You don't know anything. I know she was more than just an artist. I know she died protecting something. And I know you're in danger. James pulled out his phone, showed Ethan the email. But here's something you don't know. 16 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I left your mother because I was too weak to stand up to my family. I didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't know about you. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at him, emotions warring across his face, disbelief, anger, fear, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. Finally, the boy spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Mom always said my father was a good man who made a bad choice. He looked down at his hands. She also said if anything ever happened to her, I should find James Carter. That he was the only one who could help. A bitter laugh escaped him. Guess fate beat me to it. Before James could respond, his phone buzzed again. Another email. This one contained a single image, a photo of Sarah's gallery, taken that night, with a message overlaid in red. Time's running out. For both of them. Time was a luxury they didn't have, but James couldn't stop staring at Ethan's face, seeing shadows of Sarah in every expression. The boy sat on the edge of the examination table, scrolling through his phone with trembling hands. 7 missed calls from Uncle Marcus, Ethan muttered. He's going to finish me. Marcus? The name hit James like a bolt of lightning. Marcus Chin? Your mother's brother? Ethan looked up, surprised. You know him? Knew him. He hated me even more than my family hated your mother. James ran a hand through his graying hair. He's your guardian now? Since Mom died. Ethan's voice caught on the last word. He runs the gallery now too. Hasn't changed anything since. He trailed off, then suddenly straightened. Wait. The gallery. That's where I found it. The package? Ethan nodded, his words tumbling out in a rush. I was helping Uncle Marcus close up last night. Found a loose panel behind Mom's old desk. There was a letter. His face fell. In the package. It was addressed to you. Before James could process this, Dr. Chin burst into the room, his usually calm demeanor shattered. We have a problem. The package, it's gone. Someone broke into my office. James's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Very clever, hiding it with your old friend, the same cold voice said. But did you really think we wouldn't be watching the clinic? You have 30 minutes. Come alone to the gallery. Bring the boy. What happens in 30 minutes? James demanded. Then we stop asking nicely. And we show everyone what really happened the night Sarah Mitchell died. The line went dead. James looked at Ethan, then at Dr. Chen. Mike, I need your car. And I need you to make a call. 20 minutes later, they were speeding through pre-dawn streets in Dr. Chen's weathered Honda. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone as he pulled up the gallery's security feed. Uncle Marcus installed cameras last year, he explained. After the break-in. Break-in? Mom's studio was ransacked 3 days before she... Ethan swallowed hard. They said it was random, but she was different after that. Scared. Started staying late at the gallery, making phone calls when she thought I was asleep. James gripped the steering wheel tighter. Tell me about the letter you found. It was old, dated about a month before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I should find you. That you'd know what to do because... Ethan hesitated. Because you'd seen something similar in Iraq. The pieces started falling into place. The forgeries, James whispered. What? Your mother wasn't just an artist. During the Iraq War, she worked with an NGO, documenting and preserving artwork that was being smuggled out of museums. That's how we met. I was the medic attached to the unit protecting her team. James checked the rearview mirror, making sure they weren't being followed. She had a gift for spotting fakes. And more importantly, for figuring out who made them. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. The gallery. They're using it to launder forged artwork. James finished. Your mother must have discovered something. But why reach out to me after all these years? Why not go to the police? Because the police were already involved. A new voice said from the back seat. James swerved, nearly hitting a parked car. In the rearview mirror, he saw a woman in a dark suit sitting calmly behind them, a badge glinting on her belt. Agent Diana Wells, FBI Art Crimes Division, she said. Dr. Chin called us when you found her son. We've been watching Sarah Mitchell's gallery for months. Mom was working with you? Ethan asked, his voice small. She was our confidential informant. Agent Wells confirmed. She discovered that someone was using her gallery to move high-quality forgeries into the legitimate art market. The night she died, she was supposed to meet me with evidence. She never showed. The package, James said. What's really in it? A ledger. Names, dates, pieces that were swapped. Everything needed to bring down an international forgery ring. And something else, proof that someone in my division was helping them. The gallery loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a faint light in the upper office. Marcus, Ethan breathed. He's not supposed to be there this early. James pulled into a side alley, killing the engine. He's not just running the gallery, is he? Agent Wells shook her head. We think he's their forger. Sarah discovered his signature hidden in the fakes. That's why she needed someone she could trust completely. Someone outside the system. But why me? James asked. After what I did. Because you were the only one who knew about Baghdad, Ethan said suddenly. Mom told me the story once, about a soldier who spotted a fake antiquity that fooled everyone else. Said he had an eye for details others missed. He looked at James. That was you, wasn't it? Before James could answer, his phone lit up with a text. A video clip, Sarah in the gallery office, the same night she died. She was placing something inside the wall panel, her movements hurried. Then she turned to the camera and spoke. James, if you're seeing this, they found out. The ledger isn't just about art. It's about something bigger. Marcus, he's not who I thought he was. None of them are. Keep Ethan safe. And remember Baghdad. Remember what we saw in the curator's office. The truth was hidden in plain sight, just like... The video cut off. 3 minutes, Agent Wells said, checking her watch. What did you see in Baghdad, James? James closed his eyes, remembering that sun-baked afternoon 16 years ago. The curator's office in the ransacked museum. The seemingly random pattern of empty spaces on the walls. Except... His eyes snapped open. It wasn't random. The missing pieces formed a message when you mapped them out. A code. He turned to Ethan. Your mother's paintings in the gallery. Which ones did Marcus move after she died? Ethan pulled up a gallery map on his phone. These 7. Said they weren't selling well, moved them to storage. James studied the pattern, his heart racing. It's the same. The empty spaces, their coordinates. He looked at Agent Wells. The ledger's not in the package. That was a decoy. Sarah hid the real evidence in plain sight, in the blank spaces between her art. A slow clap echoed from the gallery's side door. Marcus Chin stepped out of the shadows, a gun trained steadily on them. Brilliant, he said, his smile cold. Sarah always said you were clever. Pity you weren't clever enough to stay in her life. He gestured with the gun. Now, shall we go see what my dear sister left behind? Agent Wells reached slowly for her weapon. I wouldn't, Marcus said. My associates are already inside with the gallery's night guard. Your backup team too. Amazing what you can do with a few corrupt cops and a lot of money. His gaze locked on James. Time to finish what started in Baghdad. James met Ethan's terrified eyes in the darkness. Somewhere in the gallery above them, hidden in the spaces between paintings, lay the truth about Sarah's death. But getting to it meant walking into what was almost certainly a trap. Then again, he'd walked away from Sarah once before. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. After you, James said to Marcus, opening his car door. As he stepped out, he pressed the record button on his phone, broadcasting their location to Dr. Chen's contact, a certain journalist who'd been investigating art forgeries for months. The truth about Sarah's death was hidden in plain sight. Now they just had to live long enough to expose it. The gallery's emergency lights cast long shadows across the empty halls as Marcus led them inside at gunpoint. James kept himself between the weapon and Ethan, his mind racing through possible escape scenarios. Agent Wells walked beside them, her face unreadable, hands raised. You know what I never understood? Marcus said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Why my sister was so hung up on you, James. A taxi driver. A nobody. Even after you abandoned her, she kept your picture hidden in her studio. The same studio you ransacked after she discovered your operation. James replied, noting the positions of the security cameras. Most were dark, disabled probably, but one in the corner still blinked red. Marcus laughed, a hollow sound. Sarah always had a talent for stumbling into things she shouldn't. Just like in Baghdad. He gestured toward the stairs. Up. Slowly. As they climbed, James studied the walls. Sarah's paintings hung like silent witnesses, their placement seemingly random. But he knew better now. The gaps between them, the negative space, it was all part of her final message. The second floor was darker, lit only by the glow of a single desk lamp in the main office. 2 men in security uniforms stood guard over 3 bound figures, real police officers, based on their uniforms. The night guard lay unconscious nearby. Quite a setup you have here, Agent Wells said, her tone conversational. Using a legitimate gallery to move forged masterpieces. The perfect cover. It was perfect, Marcus corrected her. Until Sarah got sentimental. Started asking questions about where the new acquisitions were really coming from. He motioned them toward the office. She was always too curious for her own good. Inside the office, James recognized the wall panel Ethan had mentioned. It hung slightly ajar, its hiding place already emptied. But his attention was drawn to the paintings on the walls, Sarah's original works, arranged in a precise pattern he was beginning to understand. The package was a fake, Marcus said, pulling the brown-wrapped parcel from his desk drawer. Rather obvious, really. Sarah would never be so clumsy. He tossed it to one of his men. Check it. The man unwrapped it, revealing a stack of blank paper. Marcus's smile didn't waver. Where's the real ledger, James? You really think Sarah would tell me? James kept his voice steady, buying time as he mapped the painting arrangement in his mind. We hadn't spoken in 16 years. No, but she left you a message. That video wasn't just for show. Marcus moved to the window, looking out over the pre-dawn city. She mentioned Baghdad. The curator's office. What did you see there, James? What was so important that she had to encode it in her final message? James glanced at Ethan, seeing the same question in his son's eyes. The truth about Baghdad had died with Sarah, or so he thought. It wasn't what I saw, James said slowly. It was what your sister saw. The curator wasn't just moving artifacts. He was hiding evidence of something bigger. Something that traced back here, to New York. A flash of uncertainty crossed Marcus's face. The empty spaces on the walls, James continued. They weren't random. They formed a pattern, coordinates leading to accounts, names, dates. Sarah figured it out then, didn't she? That's why she got involved with the FBI. She recognized the same pattern here. Clever girl, Marcus muttered. Always too clever. He turned to Agent Wells. Your team didn't just stumble onto our operation, did they? Sarah contacted you specifically. Because of Baghdad. Wells's expression remained neutral. The curator in Baghdad wasn't just dealing in stolen artifacts. He was using them to launder money for terrorist organizations. When Sarah recognized similar patterns in your gallery's acquisitions, she should have kept her mouth shut. Marcus's composure cracked. We gave her every chance. Explained how much good the money could do, how many artists we could support. But she wouldn't listen. So you finished her. Ethan's voice shook with rage. Your own sister. No, James said quietly, the final piece clicking into place. He didn't. He looked at Agent Wells. You did. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Wells's neutral expression shifted into something harder, colder. Sarah was going to expose everything, she said. Not just the forgeries, but the whole network. Do you have any idea how many cases would have been compromised? How many years of work would have been undone? You were working with them the whole time, James said. Using your position to protect the operation. Using my position to do what needed to be done, Wells corrected. The money we move through this gallery funds dozens of undercover operations. Pays for informants. Saves lives. It paid for my mother's murder. Ethan spat. Wells ignored him, focusing on James. Sarah encoded the evidence somewhere in this room. In the spaces between her art. Find it. James looked around the office, seeing it through Sarah's eyes. The paintings, the spaces, the hidden message waiting to be discovered. In Baghdad, the curator's missing artifacts had formed a grid, a code that could only be seen from a specific angle. The light, he murmured. Sarah always said art was about light and shadow. Moving slowly, telegraphing his movements, James reached for the desk lamp. Wells and Marcus watched, weapons trained, as he adjusted its position. The effect was immediate. The light caught the edges of the frames, casting shadows that merged and intersected on the far wall. And in those intersections, numbers began to appear. Coordinates, Marcus breathed. GPS locations. Not just coordinates, James said. Account numbers. Dates. Everything needed to expose your entire operation. He looked at Wells. Sarah didn't just hide the evidence. She turned it into art. A slow clap echoed from the doorway. Brilliant performance, everyone. James's heart leaped. Mike Chen stood in the doorway, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, a dozen FBI agents in tactical gear swept into the room, weapons raised. Did you really think I'd only call one contact? Mike said to James. Or that Sarah wouldn't have a backup plan? Wells and Marcus moved to raise their weapons, but it was too late. The room erupted into chaos as agents swarmed in, shouting commands. In the confusion, James pulled Ethan close, shielding him as guns were lowered and handcuffs clicked shut. Through the window, he could see the first hints of dawn breaking over the city. The same light that had revealed Sarah's final message, her last gift to the son she'd protected and the man she'd never stopped loving. "Dad," Ethan said quietly, the words still new and strange between them. "How did you know? About the light, about all of it?" James smiled, remembering Sarah's words from so long ago. "Art isn't just what you see. It's what you feel in your heart when you see it. Because your mother taught me to look beyond the obvious," he replied. "To see the truth hidden in plain sight." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance as the city began to wake. But inside the gallery, surrounded by Sarah's art, and holding the son he'd only just found, James Carter finally felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Dawn broke over New York as James sat in an FBI interrogation room, his coffee growing cold. Through the one-way glass, he could see Ethan in the adjacent room, giving his statement to another agent. The boy looked exhausted, but there was a strength in his posture that reminded James so much of Sarah it hurt. "You understand how lucky you are?" Agent Rodriguez, the lead investigator, spread crime scene photos across the table. "Wells had a reputation for tying up loose ends. If Dr. Chen hadn't called us when he did." "How deep does it go?" James asked, unable to take his eyes off Ethan. "The operation? Deeper than we thought. Marcus's forgery ring was just the surface. We've uncovered connections to arms dealers, drug cartels, even foreign intelligence services." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Sarah Mitchell didn't just stumble onto an art fraud scheme. She uncovered an international money laundering network. And it got her finished." James's voice was hollow. "She knew the risks. That's why she left the breadcrumbs. The video, the gallery arrangement, the light trick, all of it leading to you." Rodriguez studied him carefully. "Why you, Carter? Why not come directly to the FBI?" James closed his eyes, remembering that last day in Baghdad. The curator's office, the missing artifacts, the pattern only he and Sarah had noticed. And afterward, in the quiet of her tent. "Because I was the only one who knew about the backup drives," he said finally. Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up. "What backup drives?" In Baghdad, Sarah didn't just document the missing artifacts. She created a database, everything she saw, everyone involved. When we realized the curator was working with someone higher up in coalition forces, she made copies. One for the official investigation. And one for insurance. Rodriguez finished. "Where is it now?" "Safety deposit box. Downtown branch of First National. Sarah made me rent it before she left Baghdad, said someday she might need someone outside the system she could trust." James laughed bitterly. "Even then, She was thinking ahead, planning for every contingency. Except you leaving her, Rodriguez said quietly. The words hit like a physical blow. Before James could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Through the window, he saw Ethan stand up, face pale. What's wrong? Rodriguez was already moving. We've got a problem. Wells wasn't working alone. We just found 3 more agents compromised, and one of them was on protective detail for Ethan. James breathed, rushing to the door. The scene in the hallway was chaos. Agents shouting, radios crackling, and through it all, Ethan's voice. They're going to finish her. Who? James grabbed his son's shoulders. Ethan, who are they going to finish? Aunt Claire, Mom's best friend. She's been looking after me when Uncle Marcus was busy. She just texted. Ethan thrust his phone at James. The message was simple. They know about the studio. Help. Sarah's old studio, James said. The one that was ransacked. It wasn't just about destroying evidence, was it? Ethan shook his head. Mom kept a studio in Aunt Claire's building. Said it was her thinking space. After she died, Claire sealed it up. Wouldn't let Uncle Marcus near it. Because there's something there, Rodriguez said. Something Sarah left behind. The real ledger, James realized. Everything else, the gallery arrangement, the video, even the backup drives, it was all just a distraction. Leading them away from. From what? Rodriguez demanded. But James was already moving, pulling Ethan with him. From the one place they'd never think to look. Sarah's last canvas, the one she never finished. How do you know? Because she told me. In Baghdad. Said if anything ever happened to her, the truth would be in her last work. James turned to Rodriguez. We need a team at 247 Bedford Avenue. Now. That's in Williamsburg, Ethan said. How did you know? Because that's where I first met your mother. Where she taught me to see art differently. James checked his watch. How long ago did Claire text? 4 minutes. They'll wait at least 15 before moving. Standard protocol, establish perimeter, confirm target, eliminate witnesses. The military training kicked in automatically. We have 10 minutes. Maybe less. Rodriguez barked orders into his radio, but James barely heard him. His focus was on Ethan, on the fear and determination warring in his son's eyes. You don't have to come, he said softly. Yes, I do. Ethan's jaw set in a familiar way. Mom died protecting the truth. I won't let Aunt Claire die too. James nodded, pride and terror mixing in his chest. Stay behind me. No matter what happens, stay behind me. They took Rodriguez's unmarked car, lights off, threading through early morning traffic. James drove like he was back in Baghdad, muscle memory taking over as he calculated angles and escape routes. Tell me about the studio, he said to Ethan. Everything you remember. It's on the top floor. Mom liked the light. There's a freight elevator in back, emergency stairs on both ends. Ethan's voice steadied as he recalled details. The canvas, it was huge. Covered the whole back wall. She worked on it at night, said it was special. Did you ever see it? Once. Just shapes and colors, but there was something about it. Like it was more than just paint. Knowing your mother, it was. James took a corner hard, tires squealing. She had a way of hiding things in plain sight. Making art that was more than art. Like the gallery arrangement? Exactly. Your mother understood something most people don't, that sometimes the best way to hide something is to make it so beautiful no one questions it. They were 3 blocks away when Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. Movement at the target location. 3 subjects entering through the service entrance. James's hands tightened on the wheel. When we get there, I want you to. Don't. Ethan cut him off. Don't tell me to stay in the car. I've spent 3 years wondering how Mom really died. I need to see this through. The words were so like Sarah it made James's throat tight. Okay. But you stay behind me. And if I say run, I run, Ethan agreed. But until then, we do this together. James nodded, turning into the alley behind the building. The freight elevator door was propped open, an amateur mistake that set off warning bells. They want us to use it, he muttered. Take the emergency stairs? No. Ethan's eyes lit up. The dumbwaiter. Mom used it to move supplies. It runs all the way up, connects to a maintenance shaft behind her studio. Big enough for someone your size, James said, understanding. But they won't be watching it. I can get to the canvas, Ethan said. Create a distraction. Every parental instinct James had screamed against the plan. But the tactical part of his brain recognized its brilliance. And the part of him that was Sarah's voice whispered, trust him. 2 minutes, he said finally. Get to the canvas, nothing else. At the first sign of trouble. I run, Ethan repeated. I promise. James pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of hospital antiseptic and gallery dust. I just found you. I can't lose you too. You won't, Ethan whispered. Mom made sure of that. Above them, a muffled crash echoed from the studio. Time was running out. James looked at his son, this miracle he'd never known he had, this piece of Sarah he'd almost lost, and made a decision. Together, he said. Ethan smiled, Sarah's smile, bright and fierce. Together. The first rays of morning sun pierced the alley as father and son moved toward the building, toward whatever truth Sarah had hidden in her final canvas, toward the chance to make right a 16-year-old wrong. Behind them, sirens wailed in the distance. The cavalry was coming. But James Carter knew the real rescue had already happened, in a rain-soaked alley, with an unconscious boy and a mysterious package, when fate had finally given him a second chance to be the man Sarah had always believed he could be. The dumbwaiter shaft was pitch black as Ethan climbed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Below, he could hear his father creating a diversion at the freight elevator, buying him precious seconds. 3 years of wondering about his father, and now here they were, working together like they'd never been apart. Through the shaft walls, voices echoed. Check the storage room. She has to be here somewhere. The canvas, get it ready for transport. What about the boy and his father? Wells's orders still stand. No loose ends. Ethan froze. Through a crack in the shaft, he could see into the studio. 2 men in tactical gear were moving towards his Aunt Claire, who sat bound to a chair. A third man stood before his mother's final canvas, studying it with professional interest. Beautiful work, the man said, running his fingers along the frame. Shame we have to burn it. You don't understand what you're looking at. Claire spat. None of you ever did. Oh, we understand perfectly. Sarah Mitchell didn't just document the operation, she encoded it. Every painting a piece of the puzzle. The man turned to Claire. But this one's special, isn't it? Her masterpiece. The one she died protecting. Ethan reached the maintenance hatch behind the canvas. Through the gap, he could see what the others couldn't, the subtle patterns woven into the abstract design, the way certain colors seemed to shift in the morning light now streaming through the studio windows. Mom's voice echoed in his memory. Art isn't just what you create, honey. It's what you see when you really look. Below, James's voice boomed through the stairwell. FBI. Buildings surrounded. Come out with your hands up. The men tensed, weapons raised. In their moment of distraction, Ethan saw his chance. He pushed through the hatch, landing silently behind the massive canvas. Check the stairs, the leader ordered. No one gets up here. 2 men moved to the door. The leader turned back to Claire. Last chance? What's the key? How do we read it? Go to hell, Claire growled. The sound of his aunt's head snapping back from a slap made Ethan's blood boil. But he forced himself to focus, studying the canvas from behind. In the morning light, he could see what the others couldn't, his mother's final message, hidden in plain sight. The abstract patterns weren't random. They were a map, just like the gallery arrangement. But this was different. This was... Oh, Mom, he whispered. You brilliant, brilliant woman. The canvas wasn't just art. It was a blueprint, every major player, every connection, every secret account laid out in a beautiful, incomprehensible tangle that only made sense when you knew exactly where to stand. And Ethan was standing in exactly the right spot. Gunfire erupted from below. Through the door's window, Ethan saw his father taking cover, returning fire. The two guards moved to engage. Now or never. Ethan burst from behind the canvas, grabbing the UV light his mother always kept by her workspace. In one fluid motion, he flipped it on and aimed it at the painting. The effect was immediate and stunning. Under the ultraviolet light, hidden layers emerged. Names, dates, account numbers, all flowing together in a magnificent dance of light and shadow. But more than that, faces began to appear. Photographs, worked into the paint itself, invisible until now. Bankers, law enforcement, everyone involved in the conspiracy. "Don't move!" The leader swung his weapon toward Ethan, but Claire was already moving. She threw herself backward, chair and all, knocking the man off balance. The studio door burst open. James charged in, weapon raised. "Get away from my son!" The leader scrambled up, using Claire as a shield. "Drop it, Carter! Or I drop them both. You don't get it, do you?" Ethan said calmly, still holding the UV light. "It's too late. Look." He swung the light, illuminating the entire canvas. In the center, previously invisible, was Sarah's face. Not painted, but photographed. She was smiling, holding up a newspaper dated the day before she died. "Insurance policy," James breathed. She knew they were coming for her. "Everything's been transmitted," Ethan explained. "The whole canvas, every layer. Mom's friend at the paper's been live streaming since I turned on the UV light. She set it up years ago, waiting for this moment. The whole world can see the truth now." The leader's face contorted. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Ethan nodded toward the window, where police lights were reflecting off neighboring buildings. "Mom always said timing was everything in art. The morning sun hits this studio at exactly 6:47 a.m. That's when the UV-reactive paint becomes visible to certain frequencies. Frequencies that every major news helicopter's camera can pick up. As if on cue, the whir of helicopter blades filled the air. She planned all of it," Claire said, tears streaming down her face. "The canvas, the timing, everything. She knew someday someone would be brave enough to finish what she started." The leader's grip on his weapon loosened. In that moment of hesitation, James moved. The gun went flying. Claire rolled clear. Within seconds, it was over. As FBI agents swarmed the studio, Ethan felt his father's arms wrap around him. "You okay?" James asked, voice rough with emotion. "Yeah." Ethan leaned into the embrace. I wish she could see this." "She can." Claire had managed to free herself from her bonds. She pointed to the canvas, where Sarah's face seemed to smile directly at them. "She knew you'd both be here for this. She believed in second chances." James touched the canvas gently. "She encoded the evidence in a way that would protect Ethan. Made sure he'd need my help to finish it. She made sure you'd find each other," Claire corrected. "The evidence, the conspiracy, that was important. But not as important as this." She gestured between them. "Family." Later, after the arrests and the statements and the media frenzy, James and Ethan stood in the quiet studio. The morning sun had moved on, but Sarah's canvas still seemed to glow with its own inner light. "What happens now?" Ethan asked softly. James looked at his son. This miracle he'd nearly lost, this piece of Sarah he'd been given a second chance to love. "Whatever you want. We can take it slow or..." "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "We've lost too much time already. Mom knew that. It's why she left us all those breadcrumbs, all those clues. Not just to expose the truth, but to bring us here. Together. Your mother always was 3 steps ahead of everyone else," James said with a soft laugh. "She said that about you too. Said you were the only one who could keep up. James wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders, feeling the weight of the past 16 years lift like morning fog. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." As they left the studio, the canvas seemed to shift one final time in the changing light. Sarah's face, forever captured in UV-reactive paint, smiled her secret smile. Her last masterpiece was complete, not just the evidence that would expose a conspiracy, but the love that would heal a broken family. Sometimes, James realized, the longest journey ends exactly where it's supposed to begin.